With the first pick in the 2020 draft, the Cincinnati Bengals select Joe Burrow, quarterback, LSU.
That his season is over. One more look at it. Oh, man, that's awful to see. The Heisman Trophy winner, the #1 pick in the draft.
The Kansas City Chiefs should be scared to death. Joe Burrow is the real deal. It's the real deal. I would remind everybody that last week, Joe Burrow got sacked 9 times and still beat him.
To go from winning 4 games one season, last season, and to being in the Super Bowl, what they've done since they drafted that dude.
It was about to get out of hand. And number 99 says, no way, no how are you getting this ball into the end zone.
Joe Burrow got sacked an NFL high 51 times during the regular season. 19 more times in the playoffs. That means Joe Burrow got sacked 70 times this year. No quarterback who ever got sacked 50-plus times has ever even sniffed to the Super Bowl.
Correct.
Disappointed in my performance overall. I thought I could have played better, give us a better chance to win, but you live and you learn. It's going to propel us into next year, and we're going to have a really good offseason.
AFC Championship game, not even thinking about you guys. How much did that motivate you coming into this?
You better send those refunds.
I've seen this 100 times now. Mahomes rolls out, and Joseph Osai, 58, hits him late. Don't blame the officials for that one. I think they got that one right.
Quarterback Joe Burrow hurt himself after a play. We later found out he strained his calf. Just yesterday, Burrow was asked about coming into the preseason fully healthy for the first time.
After he attempted that first throw, you see the recoil, the reaction there. Now he's headed back to the locker room.
When Burrow's season ended as he tore the scapulae ligament in his right wrist.
The 2024 NFL Comeback Player of the Year is Joe Burrow.
I wouldn't say this is necessarily an award you want to be nominated for 2 times.
Factors beyond his control that kept the Bengals from getting to the postseason last year, including the stubborn cheapness of the front office, the failure to have the Jamar Chase deal done and have him ready to go week 1 when they lost to the Patriots. I got to be good enough to overcome any lingering whiffs of dysfunction in the organization. It's on me. I'm going to have to make up the slack for the fact that they screwed around with Jamar's contract last year. They're screwing around with Trey Hendrickson this year. There's always going to be something. I've got to play better to make up.
Joe Burrow just had the best season of his career and missed the playoffs. 45 total touchdowns, 9 interceptions, over 5,100 total yards, and a 70.6 completion percentage. His team was just 9-8. Just missing the playoffs behind the surprise Denver Broncos. The MVP award, Josh Allen finally gets to take his home. Joe Burrow exited 2024 with the best season of his career and nothing to show for it. Some say Joe Burrow peaked in 2021, saying how the Bengals got exposed after their lucky run to the Super Bowl, saying he's a great quarterback, but he's got Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and even had Joe Mixon back in those days along with Tyler Boyd. A completely loaded offense, and that he's not carrying anybody. But that's just one side of the argument. Then you've got other people saying his offensive line is terrible, the defense was overperforming and never really that talented, and that Zach Taylor, his head coach, is no help. And that without Burrow, the Bengals would look like the bottom 5 team they were before they selected him first overall. He's established himself over his 5-year career in the NFL, but the true measure of his greatness is dependent on your answer to one simple question. Does Joe Burrow really do more with less? If you think he does, you probably believe he's a top 4 quarterback, and maybe even higher than that, who carries the Bengals year in and year out. But if you think it's a myth, you probably want to pull your hair out hearing people place him above your favorite QB in their rankings. In this video, we're going to be answering that question. Does Joe Burrow really do more with less? To figure that out, we need context and not just the stats. We need to know if the answer is yes, just how much more does he do with less, and vice versa. We need the full story, every season, every playoff run, and to do that, we got to go back to 1996. The story begins in Ames, Iowa, where Joe Burrow was born into a life of football. His dad, Jimmy Burrow, played in the NFL, CFL, coached at Washington State, Iowa State, and would go on coaching for years after. Joe's 2 older brothers, Jamie and Dan, would both soon be playing football for Nebraska. And this groundwork sets a prime example of the youngest sibling theory. Combining this with the competitive nature he grew up with was a formula for success in his early years in athletics. Unlike his father, uncle, and brothers, who all played on defense, Burrow initially wanted to play wide receiver or running back, but started off as a quarterback because his first youth team had no one else who could play. Eventually, he would lead Athens High School to a state championship game as a senior, showcasing his passing accuracy and cool demeanor. He was also a standout basketball player, earning all-state honors as a point guard. He dominated in his high school years. 11,400 yards, 157 total touchdowns from sophomore to senior year, but 0 offers from major programs until late in the cycle. Ohio State eventually gave him a chance, but to sit behind JT Barrett and Dwayne Haskins. That would lead to 2 years and 0 starts for Joe Burrow. He would enter the transfer portal and end up joining the LSU Tigers in 2018. The first year he had was alright, but most remembered how that first year ended.
Pressure coming, and it's picked off! It's Brandon on the ground! Nate Evans is chirping him, giving him business, but then 10 is Burrow. 93 yards. Joe Burrow threw it right to him, and Brandon Moore down the sideline. Nobody to beat, and there are no flags. 93 yards, and the flag comes in play.
That vicious hit was a defining moment for Joe Burrow. As the opponent returns his pass for a touchdown, he is seen aching on the ground, understandably, but he would get up, and he would go on to win this game. A great way to finish off his first season with the Tigers. He would carry this momentum into the next season and go on to have what is regarded as one of, if not the best, college football season of all time. He would land 5,671 passing yards, 60 touchdowns, win the Heisman, and go undefeated on his way to a national championship. Widely regarded, like I said, as the greatest college football season ever by a quarterback. And then, entering the draft process, 2020 was a weird year. We had the virtual draft process. And, draft time always gets kind of strange with the quarterback rankings. There were some rumblings here and there about the potential of guys like Justin Herbert, as there always are during the draft process, citing things like Joe Burrow's hand size not being the biggest, but he was still the top guy on everyone's board. The Bengals, they were 2-14 and picking first overall. After nearly a decade of Andy Dalton, defined by 5 first-round exits and a harsh regression. The team hadn't won a playoff game since 1990, and they only had 5 playoff wins in franchise history. They needed someone who could revive the franchise. They took him first overall in a great quarterback class without a second thought, and he walked into a franchise that had been broken for decades, looking to be the solution. Entering his rookie year, there was no preseason. We had COVID restrictions and all that, so there were just modified practices. Rolling into the season with T. Higgins as his wide receiver 1, he would start off strong from a production standpoint. In his first 9 starts, he would tally up 2,688 yards, 13 total touchdowns, and a 65% completion percentage. And the poise was well beyond his years. The Bengals' offensive line, however, not quite as poised, bottom 3 by almost every metric. He was hit constantly. 32 sacks, 72 QB hits in just 10 games. That's a pace of 54 sacks and 122 QB hits. But then things got even worse. In week 11 versus the Washington football team, on 3rd down, he's sacked and twisted up, suffering a torn ACL along with other damage to other ligaments like his MCL. Even though they weren't winning games, they were averaging almost 23 points per game before that Washington football team game and had the offensive spark from his play. He would have paced out to 4,570 yards, 22 touchdowns, and 8.5 picks. And that's without Mixon too, since he was injured from week 6 on, who was still the team's leading rusher by season's end with only 428 yards. But even in injury, you saw it. The Bengals had something. The fans were definitely not discouraged heading into next year. They had a lot more energy. The team, it wasn't winning as much, but everything certainly felt a lot different with him at the helm. The ACL was discouraging, and some wondered if he'd ever be able to scramble the same way inside the pocket and survive behind that offensive line. Nonetheless, we entered year 2. Entering year 2, the recovery went as expected, and he started the entire season. This time, he would turn the 4-win team into a 10-win division champion. He led the league in completion percentage at 70.4. He had 34 touchdowns and threw for nearly 4,600 yards. And somehow, he got sacked 51 times in the regular season and still managed to pull that off. That was the most of any QB in the league that year. And the Bengals, nonetheless, still won the AFC North due to his greatness. It was exciting to see them in the playoffs, but no one would expect them to go on the run that they did, beating the Raiders in the wild card round. Okay, but then he survives 9 sacks versus the Titans and still wins. And then, to make things even more impressive, he goes into Arrowhead, goes down 21-3, and then outduels Mahomes in the second half, proving it is possible to defeat Mr. Inevitable in the AFC playoffs. They made this Super Bowl, and then they would face off against Matthew Stafford's Rams. They held them to a 20-16 lead in the fourth quarter, but Stafford and Kupp would not be denied, scoring a touchdown on their last drive, taking a 23-20 lead. Then, with Burrow and Chase working their way down the midfield, would eventually get into a 2nd and 1, and then 3rd and 1, and 4th and 1, where Burrow had Chase wide open, but the pressure from Aaron Donald was too much, and he would put Burrow in the turf. And he would lose the Super Bowl that he made the spectacular run to, not because he missed, but because he did not have enough time to make the plays he needed. Burrow had the Bengals within 1 drive of a Super Bowl, with the worst offensive line in football, against the greatest defensive lineman and greatest defensive player of this generation on an entirely loaded team. The fact that this game could have gone either way says a whole lot about what Burrow was doing for that offense and the team as a whole. But nonetheless, they did not win the Super Bowl, and some might say that this was in vain. Now they head into next year having to start all over again. The Bengals started 2022 with a new narrative starting to take form. They would start 0-2, 5 turnovers in week 1, and Burrow looked pretty off, but eventually he would flip a switch. They'd rip off 10 wins in their last 11 games. Burrow would finish throwing for 35 touchdowns, completing nearly 69% of his passes, and cut his sack rate in half, even though the offensive line was still average at best. They would win the AFC North again, and then came the playoffs. Round 1, he narrowly beats Baltimore, who did not have Lamar Jackson, which was a little surprising, but then he squashed all the concerns from that game by absolutely stomping the Bills. The Bills are the team that you would have expected to look comfortable in their own stadium in a snowy Buffalo game, but it was Joe Burrow's Bengals that had it all figured out and under control. Then, the Kansas City Chiefs rematch. Burrow versus Mahomes 2.0 in the AFC Championship, and this matchup was developing a reputation. Mahomes, known as a bit of a Superman, the Mr. Inevitable, was finding his own kryptonite in Joe Burrow, as Joe Burrow was undefeated against him. And things in this game went pretty similar, as the Bengals spent the whole game trailing or tied, but competed to stay in the game. A tie game late, 20-20 in the fourth quarter, allowed a punt return and penalty to the Chiefs to have an opportunity to kick the game-winning field goal. The Bengals would lose, and Burrow was solid, but the offense couldn't finish late like they did last time, and he definitely didn't play as well in this game as he did in the first one. But still, Burrow had officially become the guy. He was the only AFC quarterback who could consistently go shot for shot with Mahomes. He was no longer just a comeback story from the ACL. He was a Super Bowl caliber quarterback, and now all the Bengals had to do was protect him, and you'd figure that they were going to get there every year. In 2023, this was supposed to be the year. The weapons were locked and loaded, the offensive line was improved, and the defense was still solid. And Burrow, well into his prime. However, Burrow had a strained calf during training camp, and he tried to push through it to get ready for the season, and it showed. Weeks 1 through 4, he looked like a complete shell of himself. He couldn't scramble like he used to, which, like we've said, is a huge part of his game. He couldn't plant. and he couldn't push the ball downfield. The Bengals would fall to 1-3, further feeding into the narrative that they're not starting strong any season. Then, in October, he finally started to look right again. Back-to-back wins, 348 yards and 2 touchdowns versus the 49ers. But suddenly, his season would be cut short. Week 11, again, versus Baltimore, he tore a ligament in his wrist on a routine throw. A season-ending injury, and that was all there was to it. There was rumblings and things getting leaked about him wearing a brace on his wrist and things like that. But in the end of the day, it's not important. But just a little interesting note that they knew about this and they kept putting him out there. The Bengals would finish 9-8, and they didn't make the playoffs. But Jake Browning actually played really well, going 4-3, winning 2 overtime games during this stretch. And this certainly surprised me. And should be noted as the narrative that Joe Burrow wasn't carrying the offense and perhaps the situation was more breathable than people would make it out to be was actually getting some traction from this. People also questioned the recovery for such a rare wrist injury on the throwing hand of a quarterback. This had much more concern than the ACL because rather than being limited in mobility, something that is somewhat optional for a quarterback, this was everything that had to do with throwing, and the fears were real. However, heading into 2024, Joe Burrow would prove the haters wrong again, returning sharp, healthy, and efficient from the surgery. And he would land career highs across the entire board. 4,918 passing yards, 43 passing touchdowns, and 9 interceptions, a 108.5 rating. But what did that lead to? A 9-8 record. No playoffs, no MVP, just disappointment as the Broncos destroyed the Chiefs, who were resting their starters in order to secure playoff positionings for the Broncos and not the Bengals. Burrow played his best football of his career, but the Bengals missed the playoffs for the first time in his fully healthy seasons. The offensive line still allowing pressure on over 35% of his dropbacks, bottom third in the league. The run game ranked 25th in yards per carry. The defense couldn't finish games, especially late in the season. They lost close games to the Ravens, Chiefs, and Browns, where Burrow had them all in a position to win, but the team around him just couldn't help him close. And even with all that, Burrow still had the 3rd highest QBR in the league. QBR takes into account opposing defense, sacks, penalties, all of that stuff to sort of scale for what they're dealing with. It's a great metric, and we'll come back to this exact chart later, but it just goes to show that he was every bit as productive as the other elite QBs, even when missing the playoffs, which would imply that he has less help. So let's go into the career stats. Let's break down Joe Burrow, not just the highlights, but who he is and what he's actually produced outside of the playoffs. He has 19,001 passing yards with an average of 7.5 yards per completion, 140 touchdowns, and 46 interceptions. And rushing totals, he's only got 806 career rushing yards, but he does have 12 career rushing touchdowns. He does manage to get in there with his legs here and there. Other career accomplishments, he's 5-2 in the playoffs. His only 2 losses are one in the Super Bowl to the Rams and the others to the Chiefs in the AFC Championship the following year. He has a 0.714 playoff win percentage. That would be 9th all-time of the quarterbacks with the minimum 7 playoff games that he's played. Keeping up with this pace for about 3 more games and beyond, it would land him top 5 all-time with a minimum of 10 games played. He's got an overall career winning percentage of .558, 6 fourth quarter comebacks, 9 game-winning drives, and 2 postseason game-winning drives. The Chiefs, he's beaten twice in the regular season and once in the playoffs on game-winning drives. That is crazy. His career lows in healthy seasons. That's right, his career lows would average out to this: 4,475 passing yards, 34 touchdowns, and 14 interceptions. That's a great season, right? Well, guess what? That's his floor. His upside is nearly 5,000 passing yards with 45 total touchdowns and 9 turnovers. Clearly, the passing production is the most elite in the league right now. So let's look at his strengths and weaknesses as a quarterback to kind of paint the picture of how he was able to produce this way. Number one is processing. Nobody gets through the reads faster than he does. He is seen like Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers with how he's able to process defenses, make the quick throws, but also calculate when he's supposed to take those shots downfield. Next, anticipation. This sort of works with processing in a way, because if you're processing a defense and you know someone's about to break open, you don't need to wait until they're actually physically open to make that throw. You can throw it just before they make their cut, so that as soon as they make their cut and have separation for just a split second before the defender catches up, you've made the throw into that window. And throwing with anticipation is one of the best skills that a passer can have because of how well it pairs with processing. Next, we have pocket feel. Now this is a little bit different. When the processing and anticipation breaks down, or a play isn't there, or maybe there's pressure coming from the defensive line, this is something you're going to have to take advantage of. You got to navigate the pocket, avoid the pass rushers, and he is very subtle, calculated, but very slippery too. It's not just that he's making the right moves. He genuinely does slip out of sacks very, very well, and he doesn't panic. He keeps his head up looking downfield. He knows where the defenders are coming from, where he can step up to, and then process his next throw. Next, number 4 is leadership. Very quietly, a confident and commanding leader, respected, and very much the thing that I believe drives the confidence of the Bengals, along with their defense when they are actually playing well. I think a lot of that confidence that they play with comes from the fact that they know they have the insurance of Joe Burrow with the ball on offense. And then, of course, on the offensive side, he's a leader for the wide receivers, for running backs back in the day like Joe Mixon and now Chase Brown. And the offensive line, you never hear him throw them under the bus. So that's excellent leadership on his part. And then finally is accuracy. The processing and the anticipation is all for nothing if you can't actually make the throw that you're intending. So the ball placement that he has, not just to make those throws with anticipation into windows, but also back shoulder type throws on fades for the goal line, throwing receivers to come back to the ball, or hitting them in stride so they can maximize their yards after the catch is also something he's elite at. So these are the 5 main things that definitely make an elite passer, and he is excellent at all of them. Statistically, he's also been elite with a 68.4% completion percentage, a 3-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio, and a top 5 passer rating since entering the league. Now, what are his weaknesses? We've talked about his strengths. What about his weaknesses? Well, one thing I definitely want to point out is the slow starts, but this is something that I feel like you can kind of live with. We've seen this back in the day with the Patriots, where it would sort of take them time to get their multiple adaptable offense going. Early on in the season in September, they're trying to figure out what their strengths and weaknesses are. And I'm not going to say they're just throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks, but they're going to go in with a game plan for week 1. But if they get completely caught off guard, they might have to audible in a way they weren't prepared to. So thinking about the type of quarterback Joe Burrow is and why he's so similar to a guy like Brady who might take some time to hit his stride during the season, it makes a lot of sense to me. And as long as it doesn't cost you like it did this year, missing the playoffs, even though there were other things to blame, I think this is something that you can live with. If it means he's in his prime, in stride, in the playoffs, late in the regular season, I'll take that with the slow starts. But arm strength, he doesn't have the strongest arm in the league. He's definitely not Mahomes, Herbert, or Josh Allen, but he has enough arm strength and ability to throw with anticipation that he can sort of get away with it. He's working with a smaller margin of error, but he's well beyond conquering that. Durability, multiple injuries. This is actually a big one, I would say. You had the ACL tear, you had the calf that sort of spoiled the beginning of that season, that he had the wrist injury. And even though he's tough, having these hits add up and all of these injuries, this is another reason you can miss the playoffs, is not because you didn't play well or anything, but just because you weren't out there because you were injured. So this is definitely something that is concerning, not quite as available as a guy like Mahomes or Josh Allen, more injury concern with Joe Burrow. And then finally, I would say, kind of going into the arm strength, even though he is good in the pocket, he is very mobile when it comes to his instincts. He can throw with anticipation to make up for his arm strength. Just overall, he's not the same level of athlete as a guy like Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson. And we say this with pretty much every quarterback we go over, is that yes, you can admit that they could be more athletically talented, and that would certainly help them, and that means it's working against them. So that's the last of the weaknesses, I would say, is that he's not quite the elite athlete that you would expect an elite quarterback to be, but he's still pretty much maximized what he's working with. So once again, I think it's something you can live with. Alrighty, now we're going to get into the playoff runs and break down how each of these games went and figure out how much he was struggling due to his team. Starting with 2021 in the AFC wildcard, they versed off against the Raiders, and they would end up winning this game. Burrow threw 2 touchdowns and took a commanding 20-6 lead. And the offense slowed down through the rest of the game, but managed to chew up some clock and gave the Raiders a chance to tie the game at 26, but the Bengals defense would hold up. So looking at the box score here, you can see no turnovers here by Joe Burrow. Kept reasonably protected in this game, only allowed 2 sacks. That's you can deal with that. 244 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. The run game, only 3.3 yards per carry. So that wasn't really helping them move the ball. It was definitely the passing game by Joe Burrow. Obviously a good completion percentage too, 24 of 34. That's not bad. Drive by drive here. You got the Raiders coming out with a field goal, a nice 10-play drive, chewing up 5.5 minutes of clock, but then you go ahead and you respond with a 10-play, 75-yard drive that goes for 5 minutes and caps it off with a touchdown. So that goes from, a situation where you could be punting the ball back after a failed drive and giving them a chance to go up 10, but now you put the pressure on them. You say, oh yeah, you had a long drive, but we actually scored a touchdown. So you got to go ahead and respond, and the Raiders fumble. They go ahead and, make a short drive into a field goal, not able to convert more than looks like 1 first down here. Nope, not even 1, but the Raiders punt again. They would get another field goal, but with an 8-play, about 4-minute drive, and then that's going to lead to a Raiders field goal response drive, and then a 12-play, 82-yard, 6-minute drive. So you got scores on all 4 of your opening drives here, 13 minutes. Doing a good job of maintaining possession of the ball, keeping the ball away from their offense, but also being efficient and making sure you convert these drives into points. As I stated, their offense slowed down in the second half, but their defense was also holding up as well. For the most part, the Raiders did slowly crawl back with a field goal, another field goal, and then got into the red zone and could not finish it off with a touchdown, making this game end in a score of 26-19. This is only the Raiders and Derek Carr, but in the end of the day, a win's a win. He did his job. He definitely didn't let them down. Didn't have much of a run game, but was well enough protected to the point that he could still get this done for the win. And then moving on to the following week in the divisional round against the Tennessee Titans. This game always sticks in my head because it is famous for one stat and one stat alone: the 9 sacks that Joe Burrow suffered. That's the most ever taken in a playoff victory by a quarterback. In this game, this was a much more defensive showdown. Joe Burrow had 348 passing yards, no passing touchdowns, and an interception. As I stated, he was sacked 9 times, and he did complete 28 of his 37 passes. Once again, the run game, not too much help, 3.6 yards per carry on the ground. The Titans' run defense is very good, but Joe Mixon did break off a nice 15-yard touchdown run at some point in this game. Jamar Chase, obviously, a big help for him on his side, moving the ball, converting third downs and whatnot. But just going through how this game went down, it was looking pretty ugly for a long time. They did take a 6-0 lead, lots of punts, 1 interception by the Titans to start things off on the first drive, but they did manage to score a touchdown and sort of make up for it and keep this game close. But it was that opening touchdown of the second half that I was talking about, 16 yards here to Joe Mixon on a drive that Joe Burrow worked 9 plays down the field for 5.5 minutes, that really put them ahead. However, this is when things started getting ugly. The Titans throw an interception, and then the Bengals punt. The Titans get a field goal, and then the Bengals throw an interception, and the Titans actually to convert this into a touchdown with a deep pass from Tannehill to A.J. Brown. And now the game that was well in your favor, up by 10, is now suddenly tied. So the Bengals, they get a drive going for 4 minutes, but they eventually have to punt. The Titans cannot move the ball, and they cannot get into field goal range, so they turn it over on downs. The Bengals punt again, trusting their defense against this struggling Titans offense, and Ryan Tannehill throws another interception, and the Bengals are able to get within field goal range, hitting Jamar Chase on the sideline to the Titans' 39-yard line into field goal range. They get the kick for the win and move on. Like I said, setting the record for most sacks taken by a quarterback in a playoff victory. This very impressive because you see plenty of quarterbacks and teams and fans of teams complain that their quarterback should not get nearly as much blame for a playoff loss because the offensive line was so bad. And people are going to look at this and say, well, this is the Titans. This is the same Titans team that upset the 1 seed Ravens that went on and competed in the AFC Championship game against the Chiefs. So this is no scrub team. This is no scrub defense. He got sacked 9 times and was still able to pull off a win in a playoff game. It's super impressive. Moving on to the following week, things only get even crazier as they go on to face off against the Chiefs, down 21-3 in this game. No turnovers here, just a punt, a 14-play drive that ended in a field goal, another 5-play drive that chewed up 2 minutes, and you're now down 21-3 as Kansas City scores touchdowns on their first 3 drives. This wasn't like he threw an interception and gave them field goal range. They're going on 11, 7, and 8-play drives, scoring touchdowns, chewing up about 5 minutes of clock with each drive. And this is a spot where you definitely could look at plenty of quarterbacks in this situation and say, yeah, if they lost this game, I really wouldn't blame them. Their defense couldn't stop anything, but no, they hung in there. He goes on a 7-play, 70-yard drive for 4 minutes and goes ahead and scores, making it 21-10. All right, now you're down 11. Kansas City gets a really long drive going before the end of half, before they get to the goal line, but can't quite punch it in, and that's the score entering the second half. The teams would trade 3 punts before the Bengals would make an 11-play drive, getting into field goal range, and now it's a 1-score game. And then here, Mahomes and the Chiefs make a huge mistake. They get an interception. This was off a bobbled pass, and then the Bengals go ahead and turn this and convert this into a touchdown and get the 2-point conversion, tying the game. Lou Anarumo's defense doing a good job buckling up as they force a 3-and-out by the Chiefs, but that is quickly given right back by an interception made by the Chiefs defense. But once again, the Bengals defense buckles down and forces a 3-and-out by the Chiefs, giving the Bengals the ball back and a chance to go kick a field goal for the win. They do get down there with a 6.5-minute drive and kick the field goal, going up 24-21, but Mr. Inevitable, way too much time for him. He gets in the field goal range and ties it up. And then the Chiefs get the ball to start overtime, and Patrick Mahomes does not have a great drive at all. They get the 3rd and 10, and he decides that he's just going to chuck a corner route into double coverage, and it gets picked off. The Bengals work their way across the 50 into field goal range, and the Chiefs are basically letting them run the ball at this point because they can't really do anything else. You're just hoping that they fumble. The Bengals allow Joe Burrow to slide at midfield on 1st or 2nd down. They kick the field goal for the win and move on to the Super Bowl. Now, a lot of you might look at this game and say, oh, well, Mahomes threw that interception and, their offense kind of stalled out. The Bengals defense played well in the second half. Yeah, they did. But, we've seen teams hold this Chiefs team to points, point totals around 20, 29, less than 30 plenty of times in the playoffs and not be able to score this much against the Spagnuolo defense. But Joe Burrow, with the way he's able to process and diagnose what they're doing, was able to consistently put long drives together in the second half and late in the first when they really needed to get on the board in order to put themselves in a position to stay in this game and then eventually win it. And if you're going to compare this to the way the other AFC quarterbacks have played against Mahomes and the Chiefs and this defense in the playoffs, this is certainly the best performance. And now Joe Burrow, in his 2nd season in the NFL and his first fully healthy season, is in the Super Bowl, has taken down Mahomes and the Chiefs, and is looking to make history. He's playing against the Rams and Matthew Stafford's super team, who was acquired after Jared Goff didn't get it done against the Patriots a few years back. This game would start somewhat slow with a punt, a turnover on downs, and then a Rams touchdown on a 50-yard drive. The Bengals and Rams would trade punts again, but then the Bengals with the ball back, and an amazing pitching catch, a one-handed grab by Jamar Chase, earns them a field goal to make it 7-3. And then the Rams would score again, and now the Bengals would be down 13-3 late in the second quarter. Burrow looks to make his way to the red zone where a Joe Mixon trick pass to T. Higgins earns them their first touchdown of the Super Bowl, and that would be the end of the first half, 13-10 Rams. To start off the second half, on the first play, the Rams rush 5, and Burrow avoids the rush and steps up in the pocket to heave it deep to T. Higgins, who definitely did not offensively pass interfere with Jalen Ramsey, but makes the catch and runs it all the way for 6, even if there should have been OPI. Looking at Burrow, the way he extended this play in the pocket, avoiding the rush, guys like Aaron Donald, he made this play possible, and the Bengals are now winning 17-3. The teams would trade field goals, leading to a 20-16 score late in the game. But late in the fourth quarter, with less than 2 minutes, the Rams would march down the field, and Kupp would take the lead with a goal line fade. To this point, the Bengals had punted 4 times in a row and had only 2 first downs on those drives. But with less than 1:30 left, it was now or never. He works his way down to the 50-yard line in 2 plays, and now on 2nd and 1 at the 50. The pass is incomplete deep right to Jamar Chase, taking a chance to go for the kill shot. You're in 4-down territory, that's okay, but you just got to get this first down now. They run it up the middle with P. Ryan, who is wrapped up and just pulled short by 1 yard by the one and only Aaron Donald. And now things have gotten serious really quick. He should be able to convert a 4th and 1, right? It's 4th and 1. Trips left, Chase on the right with Ramsey one-on-one in press coverage. Burrow hikes the ball and the Rams rush 4. Chase beats Ramsey off the line, but Burrow is already under pressure as Aaron Donald immediately beat his guy through the B gap. He winds up to throw it to Uzomah, who's open on the left in the flat, but Donald is too fast. He gets his arms around Burrow and swings him around, revealing P. Ryan blanket covered in the flat on the right and Chase streaking open down on the right side. He flicks it to P. Ryan, just hoping to make something happen, but the throw is wild and at his feet, understandably. He wasn't perfect in this game, but I can only imagine if Donald didn't immediately beat his man, this pass would have been completed somewhere. But this is the Super Bowl. Great players are going to ruin your day. And they fell asleep after that Higgins touchdown and the other chances they had to produce scoring drives. But they didn't have 4 downs in those situations, and they stayed pretty conservative, and it costed them. Burrow's playoff debut run was nearly flawless, despite everything that was against him with the offensive line, the 9 sacks versus the Titans, the 7 sacks that they allowed in this game. And you did have 4 yards per carry, but I would definitely assume that the Rams had taken note that their run game wasn't working too well in the past 2 games, and you'd rather them run the ball than allow Joe Burrow to pick you apart moving the ball down the field. Moving on now to the 2022 playoffs. The Bengals make it back after losing the Super Bowl, and they face off against the Ravens and the wild card team, who do not have Lamar in this game. In this game, he was okay. I honestly was a little disappointed by the way that this game panned out for them. They got a little bailed out by a fumble return for a touchdown late in the game, and then just trading punts for the rest of the game. It was Tyler Huntley in there for the Ravens. He did have 2 passing touchdowns, but obviously, 17 for 29, converting on 3rd downs and things of that nature were not in the favor of the Ravens. They were definitely more so in the favor of the Bengals, 7-13, and then 3 of 11. It's those types of things, the chipping your way down the field, that always ends up winning you the game. But look at this, time of possession, 32 and 26 seconds to 27-34. He had the ball less, but he still managed to score the same amount of points because his defense still did make up for it with the touchdown. Something I also forgot to mention is how you can actually control the clock by passing the ball as well. It's very simple. You just do a lot of checkdowns and dump offs, and you don't run out of pounds. And it's essentially the same thing as running the ball because the risk is very, very low. You're getting small chunks of yards so you can reliably move the chains, but you're also chewing up a lot of clock because you're using so many plays to do so. And look at the advantage that the Bengals are able to give themselves with this effective quick passing game that they can pull off. 31, so roughly 32 minutes to 28 28 minutes definitely gave them a slight edge in that game. But then looking at this Titans game, a lot of this is going to be due to turnovers, but it's also them not turning the ball back over. 33.5 minutes to 26.5 minutes versus the Titans against the Chiefs. So it's actually from this 5.5 minute drive they had in overtime here, which means that they would have been pretty close, but that the Chiefs would not have had 30 and the Bengals would have had the time of possession advantage because the Chiefs only had a 14-second drive in overtime. And I remember this being a big reason that people pointed out after this game why the Bengals were able to upset the Chiefs. Of course, the 2 turnovers is a big help, but holding on to the ball after the turnovers, big reason why. In this Rams-Bengals game, you're able to see that they were able to keep it relatively close to the Rams, but then look at this, 2 yards per carry. So Stafford himself is doing a great job of, moving the ball and, not turning it over or anything like that, even though he did have 2 interceptions in this game. But they were just able to possess the ball for longer, 6 for 15 compared to 3 for 14, and then 1 for 1 on 4th down compared to 1 for 3 for the Bengals. Moving on to the Ravens game, you can see the Ravens actually possess the ball longer, but he's able to maximize the time he has with it, converting the 3rd downs and whatnot, better completion percentage. Either way, I see this very similar to the Raiders game, where this is definitely a team you are much better than. They don't have Lamar, so you should win. But that Ravens defense was, preparing to be one of the best units in the NFL over the next 2 to 3 seasons. So, there is that working against them. And, they get to play against Joe Burrow, a couple times a season. We see a similar thing with Lamar when he plays the Steelers. Sometimes those divisional opponents are just tricky. And we can see that they're much better than this when you see what they did the following week against the Bills. We see one of the best games of Joe Burrow's entire career, starting things off with 2 long drives, chewing up almost 10 minutes of clock, scoring touchdowns in both of them. And the Bills go 3 and out in between this, and this just puts them so far behind the sticks. Because this game, it was snowing, and you would expect in a sloppy game like that the bigger, stronger quarterback with bigger hands should be the better guy for this situation. But it was the finessing passing team that was able to keep up their scheme and keep executing their assignments and go ahead and win this game. I mean, they stayed ahead the entire time, and the Bills could not do anything on offense. And at that point, you're just looking to have long drives, and it's not like they even slowed down. Let's look: 6 plays, 10 plays, 6 plays, 14 plays, 6 plays and a half, 12, 9, 8, 2. I mean, they punted, but did they ever really stop the Bengals? I don't think one time they really, truly stopped them, except for right here. You got 6 plays, 2-minute drive. They got the ball back, and then they scored. So, you're getting a little momentum there, but you weren't able to keep converting that. So, absolute domination, one of the most impressive teams. This Bills team was red hot, 13-3, the higher seed, and they just get completely blown out in their home stadium, in their own environment. And then finally, they make their way back to the AFC Championship against the Chiefs. And unlike last time, where the Chiefs won or lost the turnover battle, they lost the time of possession battle. They had slightly more first downs, but you can see they won all of those categories this time. And the game was still very, very close. It was still 20-20 until the very end, when things sort of went back and forth, trading punts. And it was like, who's just going to get into field goal range first? I mean, this is like almost a whole 3rd quarter right here that you have them going back and forth, interceptions, punting, and then on this field goal by the Chiefs, you had a penalty that set them into field goal range after Patrick Mahomes scrambled, an unnecessary roughness for a hit going out of bounds on a 3rd and 4. It was just brutal. And even before that, you had a punt return by Sky Moore for 29 yards, which also helped them get in there. The game should have really went to overtime, just like the last one, but the Bengals as a whole sort of choked the end of this game. I mean, Burrow he scored right here, but this interception right here couldn't have it. And, you win some, you lose some. You're going toe-to-toe with Mahomes. It's not like you're losing every single time, am I right? You're competing in every single one of those games. Bills game, you see a very similar sort of thing. Where they dominate time of possession, they don't turn the ball over, they have a ton of first downs. This is just something that you're always gonna see in games where one team wins. Chances are that they probably won time of possession they probably won the turnover battle. Like, look here in the second AFC Championship, the Bengals are the one with more turnovers. The Chiefs are the one who possessed the ball longer and had more first downs. So they were the ones who were able to more consistently finish off the game instead of it, ending in a tie or something like that. So that was the 2022 playoffs, and they were close to making it to back-to-back Super Bowls, but they could not make it back the second time. In 2023, they missed the playoffs. He was injured week 11. The Bengals, even if they did make the playoffs, weren't going to go far without him. 2024, as we stated, MVP season, just completely wasted. They were red hot late in the year, but if they had just won either that Chargers game or that Steelers game, it would have been enough to get them into the playoffs, so that's too bad for them. Burrow led multiple comeback drives late in the year, only for the defense to collapse and for the line to fall apart. People are going to want me to dissect the games that they lost to, say, the Patriots early on, as if that truly reflects what we expect from Burrow in the postseason. Sure, that's one example of them starting off bad in the season, but we know he starts slow. How about the 5 other games where he lost, averaging a score of 34 points per game on his side? A lot of people think a lot of different ways about this Bengals supporting cast. Everyone will tell you he's got the best wide receivers in the league, top tier weapons, a defense that did get them to the Super Bowl and play well. So let's look at it. On paper, I would definitely say the wide receivers, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd back in the day, best wide receiver duo or trio that any quarterback has had in this league, in my opinion. But Boyd's been gone for a little bit, and I think people forget how much time T. Higgins misses year in and year out with these nagging hamstring injuries and things like that. And when that happens, then Chase gets doubled, and then he's got to make things work with your Jermaine Burtons of the world, your CJ Uzamas, your Mike Gesicki's. Outside of the wide receivers, I really wouldn't say he has that much support, especially since Mixon's been gone. They've never had an elite tight end. Chase Brown is a good receiving back, but he's not going to chew it up between the tackles. And then most importantly, the offensive line. Let's just be real here. He's never had a top 10 offensive line. In 2021, they allowed 51 sacks, the most in the league. In 2022, they allowed 41, which was the 6th most, so a little better, but still bottom quarter. And then in 2023, the pass protection did finally improve, but the run blocking is still 29th. So you're still very one-sided offensive line. And then in 2024, back to the bottom third in pressure rate, allowing 48 sacks, the 4th most in the league. And you're going to be forced to throw more when you can't run the ball as well. Some people might say, well, he gets sacked so much, he threw the most passes in the league. But like I said, if you can't run the ball, the pass pro has improved the past 2 years. It's just half the battle, because once everyone realizes you can't run the ball, they're going to tee off against the pass. And then whatever improvement you've already made is challenged again. So Burrow has had to consistently get the ball out quickly, and he is faster than almost anyone in the league at that. But he also has to do that just to stay upright. But in the plays that he does extend, looking for wide receivers to buy time downfield, he's by no means the most athletic, but the attention to detail, like Brady in the pocket, the little things he does to buy him a half second here and there, is elite, just like the other scramblers in the league, and it can't be overstated. So when looking at time to throw statistics, just remember that, he is buying time in the pocket here and there, like guys like Lamar, not nearly as frequently, but you understand what I'm saying. He is not just a statue in the pocket. So let's come back to this chart. All right, so coming over here to this chart, you can see we're looking at time to throw. And I just want to point out that pretty much everyone who is going to have a shorter time to throw than him is a much worse scrambler. Starting here, we got Kirk Cousins, Daniel Jones, Gardner Minshew, Baker Mayfield, Joe Flacco, Trevor Lawrence, Aaron Rodgers. Jaden Daniels, definitely a better scrambler than Joe Burrow, Will Levis, Cooper Rush, Andy Dalton, and Tua Tagovailoa. So other than Jaden Daniels and arguably guys like Baker and Gardner Minshew, look at his rating compared to all of these other guys. I mean, Baker Mayfield is right there. He really is, with 106.8, and he's someone we could talk about in a future video. But I want to point out to you about how elite this processing is. Your rate compared to your time to throw is a great way to show how efficient you are with your targets, because anyone can do what, say, Daniel Jones had to do on the Giants and just dump it off to Wandale for 4-yard gains every play. And I understand he had a poor offensive line too. You're not maximizing anything about this. You're just doing it quickly. But the nuance with the way that Joe Burrow does it, say things like looking off safeties. He, waits until they back off before he does this sorts of thing. Who knows everything that's going through his head when he's making these decisions, but you see the rate that he has with his time to throw is the highest going to 2023. He really did only play about half the season, but looking at time to throw once again, you're going to find him near the top of the list, 2.54, and he's got the 91 rating, 62 for Trevor Siemian, 88.5 for Trevor Lawrence, 77 for Mac Jones. And these are struggling teams who are doing this because their offensive lines are terrible, and so are the Dolphins. Their offensive line is not good. He's got to get the ball out quick. And Tua, I'll give him some credit for the way that he operates his Dolphins offense. And the way they have it schemed up is definitely a lot of yards after catch. He plays very similarly to Joe Burrow, but I do think he's a little bit more limited athletically, and that's a big thing holding him back. Having to make throws with even more anticipation than Burrow does because he can't just rifle it in there as well. So Tua is an interesting guy, kind of like Baker, but going to the next year, 2022, Joe Burrow, second in the league, 2.55, very similar to the previous season. A higher rating than Tom Brady when operating at this level. Now, I do understand this is Tom Brady's last year, right? And he wasn't quite exactly the same guy, but it's not like there was this huge drop-off. And you see other guys, Trevor Lawrence, he's kind of close. Tua, pretty similar, kind of in the same sort of deal. Like last year, where he's kind of established in his offense as someone who plays like Joe Burrow, so he's having similar stat lines. Pretty sure he also got hurt in this year, but you understand where I'm going with this, is that his time to throw and how quickly he has to work his way through these reads and the rating he's able to put out when doing so is pretty remarkable, and it's just, to me, one of the best ways to indicate how strong he is as a processor. Over here in 2020, even his rookie year, you got him here at 2.65. You got a lot more guys. I mean, it looks like we got a lot of backups here who are getting in there, probably on struggling teams, looking for their quarterback. But rookie here, Joe Burrow, is better than a lot of them. So that's the time to throw. And now we're going to come back to this chart. We looked at time to throw, but now we're just looking at straight up quarterback rating. And one thing that always stood out to me about Joe Burrow that I've said 100 times already is his processing and his ability to punish you as a passer however he needs to. He comes in third last season behind Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, who both had MVP caliber seasons as well, Josh Allen bringing it home. Now, Lamar and Allen's placement above Joe Burrow can definitely be indicated by this, the run score that they have. Josh Allen ranking second with 28.4, and oh my God, Jaden Daniels. Oh, we'll talk about that some other day. Lamar Jackson, 20, and then you've got Joe Burrow all the way down here at 12 at 13.3, which honestly isn't bad for someone who's primarily a passer, but yeah, it's still pretty far away from what Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson are doing. We've seen mobility become a big part of a quarterback's game, a guy like Josh Allen and Lamar, but they haven't really made it far through the playoffs on their legs. Once it's focused on in the playoffs, the structure of their offense really tends to destabilize. Turnovers and inconsistencies late in the game tend to start to show up. However, if you're a passer, it really doesn't matter at all if a team wants to focus on your legs, because your plan doesn't rely on that whatsoever. So it's almost like a sort of benefit in the playoffs in those 2-minute situations. And we can see just how much of a better passer he is when we see how he's first in total plays ran by a quarterback. So this is plays where it's dependent on him. It's not like a handoff. He's involved in the most plays on his offense out of any quarterback in the league. When you look at EPA, which is expected points added on those plays, he is far and away ahead of even Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. And when you look at points contributed by a quarterback, this is sort of like QBR, the number of points contributed by a quarterback accounting for QBR, and how much he plays above the level of an average quarterback. He's number one in that as well. Passing, he is almost 20 points higher than the next closest guy in Lamar Jackson. And Lamar is about 15 points higher than the third ranked guy. So it just goes to show how crazy exceptional his passing ability is. And then you look at the sacks, how much are you getting taken away from you by sacks? He's near the top of the league. CJ Stroud, Geno Smith, and Caleb Williams getting all of this opportunity taken away, and then penalties as well. Bottom third, 2.9. Raw QBR is just non-adjusted. It's still third. It just makes you wonder how it's even possible for him not to be only first in EPA, but expected points by a whopping 14.7 compared to Lamar's 107.9. I want to put a big emphasis on how something I mentioned in my Lamar video as a weakness for him is the ability for a quarterback to pass the ball will always be harder to defend than the run. So if you're not able to pass the ball in these short methodical drives that go to all the way to third down every time, if you can, then you're not going to have that ability to slowly chew up the clock or quickly work your way downfield by throwing out routes and getting out of bounds and stuff like that. When you're a passer and that's primarily what you do, you're going to have a lot more reps and practice at it. When you can successfully blend them together in the top four, like Mahomes, Allen, and Lamar, and Burrow, is when you get something truly special. To varying degrees, they are all good passers and runners/scramblers, but Mahomes seems to be the most even blend of the two. Allen and Lamar are the more run-heavy guys despite their development in the passing game, and Burrow is primarily a passer, even though his scrambling and awareness in the pocket is elite. It seems Mahomes is the perfect combination, but I think there's a real argument that Burrow is a sharper quarterback. He isn't as fast and his arm isn't as strong, so his processing has to be faster than Mahomes is to perform the same exact action in the same amount of time, or to even do it better. He also doesn't have Andy Reid or that offensive line or that defense with him. He might have better receivers than Mahomes, but Mahomes also had Tyreek and Kelsey to start things off. The defense has improved over time, taking the load off of his shoulders as well. So I'm not saying Burrow's a better quarterback than Mahomes, but processing serves you the most in these clutch situations, and I think he might have a slight edge there, and that could explain some of these victories in the playoffs. So the 3 healthy seasons, he's climbed from 12 to 10 to 3rd in the league in QBR, dealing with this poor offensive line, being sacked the 1st, 6th, and 4th most in the league. Mahomes, Allen, and Lamar are rarely seen that high on those sack lists at all. So where many people argue this is offset by the wide receivers he has, Chase and Higgins, along with Boyd as the 3 back in the day, let me start off with the fact that Burrow has proven to be in rare company when it comes to processing, throwing with anticipation and accuracy. So he is giving these wide receivers the best opportunity possible and maximizing their potential. So let's compare what wide receiver duos and trios do for other quarterbacks in the league and decide, factoring in the difference in their offensive line, the demand for scoring with shootouts and bad defense, to see who has the most impressive production. You have the Dolphins. They have been productive, but similar offensive line struggles and stale offense has held this team back and Tua from doing anything in the playoffs. Tua plays a very similar style to Burrow, but is far more limited in the harsher conditions than Burrow is, and the playoff record pretty clearly shows that. The 49ers, very productive. They get Purdy to the Super Bowl, but Purdy, even back in Jimmy G's days, haven't been able to maximize them and get them to beat the Chiefs, or even get there without having the entire squad healthy. The Buccaneers, the Bucs have impressed me a lot recently. Impressive runs in the playoffs, ending in losses to the Lions and Commanders, but I would definitely say the offensive line they have there is a lot better than what the Bengals have, and same with the defense. Plus, Baker's been in the league for a while now, so to get to this point, it's taken some time. We've seen Burrow produce like this immediately. And then the Bears. I think this is actually a really great example. The Bears were in a far better spot than the Bengals were and loaded the weapons immediately to a Messiah-like first overall pick in Caleb Williams, just to have it all fail due to a much worse offensive line and much worse coaching, but better defense. I would imagine Caleb is going to do much better this year with the improved offensive line and Ben Johnson, but we still saw a total collapse we've never seen anything of the likes of with Burrow. And then finally, this defense. Lou Anarumo built a smart defense that's opportunistic, but it's pretty inconsistent. I mean, what we see in the postseason is never what we see in the regular season. 2021, they did play well the entire postseason. Same sort of deal in the 2022 game, but I mean, that one play hitting Mahomes out of bounds and the special teams unit kind of getting blended in with the defense. Allowing that punt return definitely wasn't great. There was plenty of game before that where they could have been put in a better position. 2023, you had Joe Burrow's injury, and then you had injuries to the defense in general. And the unit kind of fell off, and they decided to let go of guys like Jesse Bates, which turned out to be a massive mistake, as in 2024, they were awful. They were 27th in red zone defense and bottom 10 in pressure rate, resulting in 2 40-point games and 4 other games allowing 34 or more points. The defensive fall-off at this point had been cemented. This team was built to be good enough. The defense has shown up, but never been game-changing in my eyes. And the role Joe Burrow plays in controlling time of possession and protecting the football needs to be taken into account, as other quarterbacks in the playoffs who are regarded this highly can't even seem to do that sometimes. So, as I said, we've seen the fall off over the years, but we've had the same guy playing quarterback. So the regression is clearly from a deterioration of the defense and a deterioration of the run game. So while I do believe he has the best wide receiver duo in the league, that is the only exceptional thing about the Bengals outside of Burrow. From the offensive line that really hasn't improved too much at all, to the defense breaking down, and Zach Taylor really not providing too much to help elevate Burrow, and even options outside of Chase and Higgins, and losing guys like Mixon in free agency. Like, there's not much left of this offensive cast of weapons. And something else I want to mention is some people will say, well, he took on that massive contract and that's why they can't afford to pay anyone on defense. This is not an issue that other teams are having. Like, say, Jalen Hurts on the Eagles. They can pay everyone, right? You've got tons of guys who are on max deals. Jordan Love just got paid a ton of money, and the Packers are still able to bring in additional pieces and pay the guys that they have. But the Bengals have very historically been a very frugal franchise that doesn't do things the normal way. I think it's super unfair to try to blame Joe Burrow for taking the same contract that all the other top quarterbacks in the league take and then say he's the reason that they can't manage to sign defensive players. I mean, it's not his job. There's other teams that move money around and make it work. That's the Bengals' job to make that happen. So the organization is something I honestly haven't mentioned at all to this point, but they're a big reason why, if he doesn't win a Super Bowl, that would be my first thing to look at. So finally, let's answer the question. Does Joe Burrow really do more with less? Absolutely. He does more with less than almost any quarterback in football. He might as well be the definition of a quarterback that does more with less. So let's break down what that less actually is. Since his rookie year, Burrow's been hit more than any quarterback in football. Even during his Super Bowl run, he was sacked 19 times in 4 playoff games. That's a career-ending pace for some guys, and yet he never wavered, never complained, or pointed fingers at his offensive linemen. He adapted and played the way he had to pull off the wins. He would get the ball out faster, process quicker, and make the offense work even when the line broke down. Less scheme. He's never had the benefit of a super creative offensive coach. No Kyle Shanahan, no Andy Reid, no Sean McVay. He's never had any of those guys. So the responsibility's been on his shoulders to develop chemistry each season and rely on that for adaptability. Burrow is the scheme. He diagnoses the defense. He controls the protections. He makes the reads. He makes the audibles, and he elevates everyone the best he can. And then finally, less balance. Over the last 5 years, the Bengals have ranked in the bottom half of run game efficiency in 4 of them. The defense has had its moments, especially in 2021 and 2022, but they've never been elite wire to wire. So all of that, you know, when you're in a positive game script and you need your defense to play well and you need to run the ball, they've really never been that great at that. A lot of that has come from Joe Burrow managing the drive. So most great playoff teams have at least one of those supporting the quarterback. But like I said, on the Bengals, it's just Joe Burrow. And then still, he's led 3 playoff wins on the road. He's taken down Mahomes and Arrowhead in the AFC Championship. And this was from a 2-14 franchise before he arrived. And then makes a Super Bowl in year 2. I mean, that's not just getting lucky or a coincidence. You can't win that many important games on accident. I think there's a strong case that among the 4 elite quarterbacks in the NFL, he's got the worst supporting cast, and he competes at the highest level regardless. It's also strange to me how people are so quick to credit Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson for their regular season play and for how far they have gotten in the playoffs despite constantly falling short to the same Chiefs team. And Josh Allen certainly played better than Lamar in those games, but Joe Burrow has been dealing with less and was able to, not by some fluke, but consistently take the Chiefs down and compete with them. It just is crazy to me. I mean, Mahomes is playing like the best playoff quarterback we've ever seen. His only ever loss in the AFC playoffs have come to Tom Brady and Joe Burrow, who almost did it twice. But we're going to act like that doesn't mean anything, or like anyone on the Bengals could have gotten that done playing quarterback. I don't think so. Winning the Super Bowl is obviously the highest achievement in the NFL, but what's the second highest? To me, it's definitely defeating Mahomes in the AFC Championship, because chances are he's going to be the guy you need to beat in the Super Bowl. So if he's been unstoppable pretty much since Brady's left, and no one has been able to beat him except for this one guy, I'd say he's got the highest level of achievement outside of winning Super Bowls. The only quarterback in NFL history who has done more early on with this little, you could say guys like Andrew Luck, maybe, joining that Colts team, never being supported with the offensive line, eventually retiring because they could not protect him. It's guys like that come to mind. Everyone else has joined, a pretty good team if they've had this much playoff success early on in their career. But no one's carried the hope of, the Bengals with 0 Super Bowl wins, no playoff wins since 1990 on their back quite like he has. And now he's entering the heart of his prime. The wrist was fine. Obviously, he's sharper than ever. The ACL hasn't been holding him back. Nobody's ever questioned his leadership. And it's on the Bengals front office to me at this point. I mean, the way that they've lagged behind this Jamar Chase thing, the T. Higgins contract, now with Trey Hendrickson and your first-round pick, Shamar Stewart. I mean, you're getting cute with these contracts, but you don't even realize that there's guys out there like Howie Roseman who've had this figured out for years, and you just won't basically copy and paste their strategy for managing the cap to build a more layered offense and fix the defense. But because Burrow has proven he can go toe-to-toe with Mahomes, Allen, Lamar, or anyone, in those games, the smallest gaps can make a difference. Because they're not very good at making these adjustments, it does make me a little worried that maybe he doesn't get back there, right? Maybe he only ever gets to the AFC Championship or loses the Super Bowl, but never quite has that last piece that he's missing to help him win. You saw it in the Rams game where, he was actually putting together a drive that looked like it was going to, be for the win. But your guy gets a B gap by Aaron Donald in a second and a half, and there's pretty much nothing you can do there. I mean, it's the best defensive player of this generation. He's already given the Bengals the greatest stretch in their franchise's history. Everyone's got faith as a fan. And now it's time for the Bengals to reward that faith by giving him the support he's earned. On the defense, pay the guys, move the money around, and let him take care of the rest. As I mentioned earlier in this video, Joe Burrow really reminds me of how guys like Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, and Peyton Manning used to play the game, with these long drives, making his way down the field, whether he's got to hit guys going out of bounds to stop the clock, or chew up as much as he can to make sure the opposing team doesn't get a chance to get the ball back. He can manipulate the end of the game through the passing game, which is the best way a quarterback can do so. Guys like that are few and far between these days in the league, and he's got as good a chance as anyone, I would say, to win a Super Bowl on a healthy roster that signs all of their players. So, in conclusion, I do think Joe Burrow does more with less. That offensive line, that defense has shown some serious regression over the years. And outside of Chase and Higgins, I don't really see much in the way of helping Joe Burrow to accomplish the goal of winning the Super Bowl. Even last year missing the playoffs, and as big of a disappointment as that was, the Bengals were looking red hot down the stretch, and perhaps even better than the Ravens, who were getting injured, and the Bills, who once again fell short to the Chiefs in the AFC Championship. It looked like the Bengals could have been the team, even with that supporting cast, to take them down and give the Eagles a shot in the Super Bowl. Now, I still think they would have lost, but it just goes to show how close to the Super Bowl Joe Burrow can bring this team, no matter what state it's in. So heading into this year, hopefully they can get Trey Hendrickson and Shamar Stewart signed on defense, and they can have a hot start to the season instead of a slow start. But either way, I think eventually Joe Burrow's going to finish his career with a ring on his hand.
This first half of action at the AFC Championship. Second. They still don't have him down yet. fires to the end zone. Oh my goodness, how did he get away? Chance. No. And he trouble, and he runs for first down. And Cincinnati